It starts with the D, the scribe, who went a little bit. He claimed to be
Dayyān. Asadullah
yeah.
Khuyya Dayyān. Yeah.
And I don't know if anyone conspired with Baha'u'llah. It may have been him.
That has occurred to me quite a few times, especially in my meditations. I've sat down and thought about this using zikr. I've written notes about this, but during those 2 years, this is when this whole thing erupts between Dayyān and Subh-i-Azal. It's just right when Baha'u'llah is in the Suleymaniya Mountains. Now, Iraqi Kurdistan and Azerbaijan and Iran are not that far away. It's just a matter of about maybe 50, 60 miles, especially to Khoy, where Asadullah was living. It is very possible that Baha'u'llah may have had a communication with this guy during that period, because we don't know what Baha'u'llah was up to. I mean, it's only his word that he went AWOL and went to the Iraqi Kurdish mountains. For all we know, he maybe even went to Iran during that 24 months, right? But, my own kind of cash or speculative gnosis on this matter is that whole incident was actually masterminded by Baha'u'llah himself.
It seems like his plan fits directly into the writings being suppressed.
Yes.
And that the two of, one thing leads to another in such a way to suggest, yes, exactly as you were saying, a mastermind. And if he was the one who attempted previously to assassinate the Shah, I mean, he wanted to set himself up as this exile prince that was going to retake the kingdom.
Yes.
And, at some point, the English may have recognized that, and he's thrown in his weight with the English, and that follows, and eventually they murder his descendants to sort of keep the claim and the money.
Yeah.
But
I think that is that the probability of that is about 99.9%. That is exactly what went down. So Dayyān, Asadullah Dayyān, I mean, I think this story, you would be able to understand this. I think that Baha'u'llah may have messed with this guy's head somehow. Now, how that would have been, how that happened, God knows how that happened.
Drugging him?
Maybe drugging him, sorcery. You and I both know these things are real. Take your pick, because this man was a loyal Bābī. He had all of these epistles from the Bāb. He was directly appointed in word, and he accepted to be described to Subh-i-Azal. Then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this guy goes AWOL and starts burning the works of the Bāb and denouncing the Bāb and denouncing Subh-i-Azal and challenging Subh-i-Azal. It's very strange, I mean, the way that the Bayanis have written about this, and when you read between the lines of what they say, it is pretty obvious to me that this guy had lost his head, just totally gone cuckoo. And why that...
Somebody given him fraudulent information, or
yeah.
There's a belief that, if I understand it correctly, that Baha'u'llah used to have good handwriting before he had to drink his own poison.
Well, that's not quite true, because you actually see his hand, a shaking hand, in some of the epistles from the Baghdad era. That's why he had a scribe, even then.
So I thought that the Baghdad era was where he tried to poison his brother.
Yeah.
Or was that?
No, that was in Aderna. That was in Adrianople.
Okay.
So, this is another kind of proof that this whole story about, Subh-i-Azal trying to poison Baha'u'llah is nonsense. And it was actually the other way around, because one of his family members, recently, of course, made the assertion that Baha'u'llah had cerebral palsy in his hand, and that his hand actually started to shake towards the last few years of the Baghdad exile, right, before they even left Baghdad.
I thought the account was that, because Subh-i-Azal did not eat, he told his brother to eat. He tried to eat from one side of the plate, and it made him sick.
Yeah.
But it may have also been a different illness that made his hand have trouble writing.
Yeah.
Because,
but it was definitely not as a result of poison being administered by Ṣubḥ-i-Azal, because Ṣubḥ-i-Azal never administered poison.
No, in his own poison. That was where the only source of poison was his attempt to kill his brother.
Yeah.
But the thing that I was taught, I'm not sure how true this is that Baha'ullah originally had trained his younger brother in calligraphy and writing.
Ṣubḥ-i-Azal in calligraphy, they had, before this whole incident of the assassination attempt, these people were aristocrats. They had two homes, one in Tehran, one in Takur and Mazandaran, and so they had tutors. They could afford to have tutors brought in. And in Nuqtatul Kaf, Haji Mirza Jani, when he records that interview with Baha'ullah, he actually mentions that Ṣubḥ-i-Azal has a very good handwriting. Baha'ullah, that is mentioning this to Kashani.
Oh.
So,
okay.
So this basically said that this doesn't imply whether he was the teacher or they had a tutor, but more than likely because these people were aristocrats, they afforded, they could afford tutors, so they brought in tutors for all of this stuff.
Now, what were Dayyān's claims after he had? Now, what did he? Because if he denounced the Bāb, what did he claim for himself?
This is the question. This epistle by Ṣubḥ-i-Azal that I recently, it came into my possession, that it's in its own hand, is the first communication that he has with Dayyān over the issue, and it's dated around late 1855, early 1856, and by the time of it, Baha'ullah, it's still in the Iraqi Kurdish mountains at that point. And the accusation, Ṣubḥ-i-Azal actually outright calls him a kafir, right, an infidel, over the fact, mainly in Dayyān's denunciation of the Bāb and the burning of the works of the Bāb in his possession. Okay? So then, there are vague indications throughout this work that Dayyān was making the claim to the supreme authority, but this whole claim to the supreme authority is very bizarre, because he whom God shall make manifest, per the doctrine of the Dayyān, is the return of the Bāb himself. Okay, it is the return of the primal point. So why was he denouncing, if he was making that claim to being he whom God shall make manifest, why was he denouncing the Bāb? Right? And this is where this element of the narrative ceases to make any sense. And I have pored over this text, and also Ṣubḥ-i-Azal's own Kitab al-Mustaqis, the Book of the Sleeper Awakened, many, many times. And the conclusion I have reached is that Dayyān had lost his head. But he had lost his head, inferentially by someone messing with him. And that is the question: who was it that would have messed with his head, and how did they mess with his head? Dayyān was a known occultist. He was widely appreciated for that. In fact, it's one of the reasons that he became a Bābī, was precisely because of the heavy occult element of all of this. He knew Syriac fluently. He read Hebrew fluently. He was extremely well versed in the science of the letters, the Jaf. He was well respected by the other Bābīs during the lifetime of the Bāb, and shortly thereafter, because of his deep knowledge of the occult. So that is the question. What happened to this man? Because his about face just makes no sense. Was it just merely a political issue that he had with Ṣubḥ-i-Azal? Was it something else? This doesn't make any sense. Now, one of the witnesses of Ṣubḥ-i-Azal, this Qazvini character, became Dayyān's believer, and this story in itself makes little sense. Why would one of the witnesses of the Bayan suddenly become a believer one of the beliefs of Asadullah Khouyi. You know, there's a lot of things. I think Subh-i-Azal himself may have intuited a lot of the details of this whole fiasco. But what the reality of this situation was, you know, God knows best what that reality of the situation was. You know, Subh-i-Azal was rightfully angry, and he was rightfully angry for one of the reasons being that this guy, Dayyān, was denouncing the Bāb very unequivocally.
That would mean one of the witnesses was denouncing the Bāb,
and then
too.
that would mean that that this witness, Qazvini, would be denouncing the Bāb as well. And this is where this all gets murky, because there are no reasons. Why would these people suddenly have it about this? And if they were going to denounce the Bāb, why would they not then revert to Islam? So what was all this claim about a new revelation all about? And so why denounce the Bāb if you're claiming a new revelation? You know, I am at a loss, you know, to understand, you know, what happened. But my suspicion is, my intuition is, very strong intuition about this, is that there is a lot more to this story, and because this all erupts during the period that Baha'u'llah is in Sulaimania, my view of all of this is that he may have had either a direct or indirect hand in all of it.
I suspect he was I mean, I don't know why one of the witnesses would have been a conspirator to this, but if Baha'u'llah had already laid some of the foundations for his claims and he was planning on making a play for authority.
Because let's not forget that this is the reason why he basically left Baghdad. This is why the witnesses ran him out of Baghdad, is because he was laying. First of all, they first accused him of apostasy because of the rumors of what had come out during his interrogation with the Prime Minister, Mirza Khan Nouri, and then they also were accusing him of making some sort of claim to authority. So, you know, this story about Asadullah Khouyi, there's a lot more to it. You know, and you know, like I said, you know, in my view, Subh-i-Azal was justifiably angry because this guy was appointed as the Bāb scribe by the Bāb himself. And the Bāb honored him with epistles. I mean, there are entire chapters, there's actually 2 entire chapters of the Book of the Five Grades that are devoted to Dayyān. You know, that Lohe Hurufat, the tablet of the letters, which is the second half of the Book of the Five Grades, that is all addressed to Dayyān, the whole thing.
I don't think I have that in English.
No, it's not in English. McEwen did an article on it. That's actually, I think, in if I'm not mistaken, it is in Messiah of Shiraz. But let me read that section of my paper where I deal with Dayyān.
Okay.
Let's see here. Okay. Let me start from here. The controversy surrounding Dayyān's death should now also be addressed. Okay. In their literature, the Baha'is have framed the condemnatory passage of the Kitab al-Mustaghīth by Ṣubḥ-i-Azal against Tabrizi and Dayyān as singularly constituting an unequivocal fatwa of death issued by the former against the latter two, providing evidence to that effect by the oft-quoted passage phrased as a command from the Kitab al-Mustaghīth, Book of the Sleeper Awakened, which states, quote, and you're all quietly mute, reclining on your seats, yet do not impale or transfix that accursed one with your spears, unquote. وأنتم صامتون في مقاعدكم ولا ترمون هذا الملعون برماحكم. In his Kitab al-Bābī, Baha'ullah has explicitly formulated such statements by Subh-i-Azal as being in the nature of a fatwa of death, issued against both Tabrizi and Dayyān. He says, در کتاب سجین خود که به مستقیز معروف است فتوای آن مظلوم را داده و همچنین نفوس دیگر. But according to letters and correspondences of Baha'u'llah quoted by Izziya Khanum in Tanbih al-Na'imin, the exhortation to those who slumber, at the time Baha'u'llah himself viewed Dayyān in a contemptuous light, and likewise exoriated him with the same epithet as the one Subh-i-Azal polemicizes Dayyān with, namely Abu Shurur, the father of inequities. This while even hinting at having personally masterminded Dayyān's demise. Namely, بفضلالله همه رو مزمحل نمودم و امرالله رو به اتمام رساندم. By the grace of God, I obliterated every one of those claimants and brought the command of God to completion. Unquote. This is quoted in Tanbih al-Na'imin. For its part, Hashbehesht unambiguously maintains the murder of Dayyān, to which event Tabrizi himself may have been eyewitness, was undertaken under orders of Baha'ullah personally, with the act itself carried out by his servant named Mirza Muhammad Mazandarani. In his Religion of the Bayan and the Claims of the Baha'is, Jalal-Azal surmises that there was no decree for murder in the Kitab al-Mustaghiz, and he simultaneously reprimands E.G. Brown for his faulty translation of the passage quoted from it here in the latest materials for the study of the Bābī religion, page 218, while adducing evidence from the latter part of the book, page 44 of the Book of the Sleeper Awakened, wherein Subh-i-Azal vaguely exhorts his followers to silence Dayyān and his claims by their words rather than by physical means. So then I have in the footnote.
Not actually having spears.
Yeah. Let me just read the note. In the Baha'i sources, such as Adib Tahirzadeh's The Revelation of Baha'ullah, Volume 1, Baghdad, 1853 to 1863, George Ronald, 1974, page 251 to 252, he claims, Tahirzadeh claims instead that Mirza Muhammad Mazandarani was acting on Subh-i-Azal's orders and had been sent to Azerbaijan for that specific purpose. However, while there seems to be some disagreement about the dating of this event, some holding it to be in 1856, others in 1857, and yet also in 1858, most of the sources are in agreement that Dayyān's death occurred in Baghdad when he came there from Azerbaijan in order to challenge Subh-i-Azal directly face to face. Baha'i sources maintain specifically that he was lured from Azerbaijan to Baghdad by Mirza Muhammad Mazandarani personally. And after Baha'ullah's return to Baghdad had already occurred, following the letter's 2 years self-imposed exile in the mountains of Sulaimaniya Kurdistan. Let's see here. Okay. Iraqi correct. A few sources maintain that Dayyān was drowned in the Tigris River at the hands of this Mirza Muhammad Mazandarani following a discussion with Baha'u'llah. And this is in Hashbehesht. Be that as it may, the reasoning offered in Baha'i sources as to why Dayyān deigned to come from Azerbaijan to Baghdad in the first one makes little sense, whereas a few of the Bayani ones that contend that Dayyān may have specifically come to challenge Subh-i-Azal to a public mubahala, a mutual execration contest rooted in the events recounted in the Quran, Surah 3, verse 61, or something similar to that, sound a lot more credible. So as you can see, this story is a lot more complicated. There's another note here I wanted to read. Where is it? Where I explained that we got to be a little bit more nuanced and critical in this entire. Here we are at note number 133. Where I have quoted Tanbih al-Na'imin, the exhortation does some page 89. Note also as glossed above how in the Persian Bayan, Gate 3, Unity 2, the Bāb specified his writings as constituting the Hujjat al-Bābī, the remaining proof of his religion that was to endure until the following theophany, and how a theme implicitly echoed in the Kitab al-Muttaqis throughout the Book of the Sleeper Awakened. Such a singular act as the destruction of the writings of the Bāb by fire would have been viewed as both an unmitigated act of betrayal, as well as consequently a very far-reaching and blasphemous challenge to the entire legitimacy of the creed itself and its survival. This would lead one to believe that in the minds of the Bābī leadership of the time, none of the Bayan's injunctions cautioning against and forbidding any form of violence against quote-unquote claimants to this supreme rank would any longer apply in Dayyān's case, since arguably with such an act as destroying the works of the Bāb, Dayyān had effectively declared war on the Bayan itself. Beyond his theophanic claims and his wide-ranging provocation to the Bābī leadership of the period, one can only speculate as to what specifically led Dayyān at that stage to exhibit such marked animosity towards the Bāb himself and his writings. However, most of the sources other than Tanbih al-Na'imeen have generally downplayed or otherwise remained silent, and even argumentatively gaslighted retrospectively, as many Baha'i sources often do, on this particularly sensitive point with regard to the overall episode of Dayyān and how it may have been viewed during the period of its unfolding. So, when you weigh all of this, just more than just a chronology, he came, this happened, that happened, this guy got killed and who was responsible. What I'm interested in, after reading, Kitab al-Muttaqis, over dozens of times, then this new tablet of Subh-i-Azal that I've read, again and again to try to tickle out more information about what was going on. It seems to me that there was more than one hand involved in this whole thing. And the issue that is not addressed by anybody is that what was the effective cause of Dayyān's falling out? What would have been the reason for him to have the conniption that he did to denounce the Bāb, and then because there are two different issues. There is his denunciation of the Bāb and the burning of the works of the Bāb in his possession, and then there is the issue of his claim. These are two separate things. Okay,
and totally in conflict, basically. And
totally in conflict, because if you are claiming, and Dayyān would have been one of the learned of the Bayan of the time before he had his meltdown, he would have known very well that the doctrine of the Bayan is that man yasrullah, that he whom God shall make manifest, is the return of the point. Right? So if he is making that claim to that station, and then denouncing the Bāb, he's denouncing himself per the doctrine of the Bayan. And that doesn't make the remotest amount of sense at all today.
And yet this witness that goes along with it, what happens to him?
He basically goes quiet. He just basically fades away into... I mean, I detail what happens to him, what happens to Tabrizi. Obviously, he was demoted from his rank of witness. Because just not too long after that is when Tahir and Siraj, the two brothers of the temporary wife of the Bāb, and the letters of the living of the second tier, they come to Baghdad. So it would appear to me that these two brothers were then appointed to that rank of witness. And then Mullah Muhammad Ja'far Nabi has already been appointed as a witness of the Bayan. It's this stuff is very, very, very murky. I've tried to, and I've said this, basically told a few people this. If there was a way that we could identify any descendants of Mirza Asadullah Khoya Dayyān, or alternatively identify any descendants of the Asadiyun that McEwen claims, were an actual group of individuals who had come to believe in Mirza Asadullah Dayyān, then I think we would be able to resolve, both by evidence and then teasing out information from whatever documents come into our possession that haven't been known until now, what would have been the efficient cause of this entire conflict. The question mark for me, after thinking about this issue for a long time now, is that this all occurs during the period when Baha'u'llah is in Sulaimania.
Where he's missing in action and no
When
one
he's
can
AWOL, when he's AWOL from Baghdad, he's not around. This is a question. This is a real question. And the Baha'is can spin this however they want, and they've spun it however they've liked, and they've put total responsibility on the shoulders of Subh-i-Azal, even though we have Baha'ullah's own letters admitting unequivocally that he actually did the deed himself, as I just quoted. Subh-i-Azal didn't shy away from this. He was interviewed by Mirza Mustafa Khatib, who asked him about this. This was during the Cyprus period. And Subh-i-Azal said, yes, I said what I said. I even predicted his death 1 year before it happened. Which is actually in this epistle that has come into my hand in Subh-i-Azal's own hand. This is all, Subh-i-Azal, you have to look at it this way. Subh-i-Azal had a responsibility, and he's young at that point. And, 1856, he is, 26, 27 years old. Okay? At that point, Mirza Hussain Ali Nuri is gone. It was probably one of the better periods of the Baghdad exile. Yet, nevertheless, Subh-i-Azal is in concealment. The community in Iran is still reeling from the experience of the 1850s. Okay? Thousands of people, we will never know the exact number, but thousands of people are dead. There's only a handful of the letters of the living still alive. The works of the Bāb are still dispersed all over the place. The compilation of everything is still far from over. And Dayyān was a very important, figure in all of this. Because he was living in a relatively remote part of Azerbaijan, Khoi, and Subh-i-Azal depended on this guy, and the Bāb depended on him. They counted on him. He's one of us. He'll be with us, and we will rebuild. Because someone of the caliber of Asadullah Khoi still lives. And then for him to have that meltdown and conniption in the way he did, the Baha'is want to try to blame this all on Subh-i-Azal, but they fail to explain as to exactly how would something have triggered Mirza Asadullah Khoi Dayyān directly when Subh-i-Azal is in concealment in Baghdad, per the instructions of the Bāb that Dayyān very well knows about. And Dayyān himself is back in Iran, in a remote part of Azerbaijan, in Khoi.
I have Rui material that actually claims, and this is bizarre, but this is part of what I was looking into, but it actually claims that Dayyān attained the presence of Baha'ullah and, kind of recognized him.
Yeah, they make these claims, but then, okay, if that is the case, then
that's why...
This really takes the cake. If that is the case, then there's an admission of the hand of Baha'u'llah in the... Number one, there's an admission right there that Baha'u'llah would have had that Baha'u'llah had a hand in Dayyān's conniption. Okay? But then...
That one, too. I believe I have... that they claim that Dayyān, a highly esteemed scribe, recognized Baha'u'llah or saw that there was at least more to Baha'u'llah than Subh-i-Azal wanted, and that's why he was killed. And it's it makes no sense at all. That's on your ignorance to make the claim.
Well, that's even a worse post hoc propter hoc argument, man. I mean, that is a red herring for the ages, right there.
But it also possibility of there being that possibly Baha'u'llah and him had worked together or something, and that Baha'u'llah needed to have him silenced to cover up that he himself wanted the writings destroyed because the writings didn't point to him, they pointed to his brother.
Yeah. All of which, Dayyān would have had the originals of a lot of this in the hand of the Bāb himself.
But
Okay.
the motives of of Dayyān and the witness are lost to me as to other than some sort of forgery or false information, or they.
This is what I was about to say. This is my suspicion. Okay, this is my. I mean, whether we can ever prove this or not, that remains to be seen. But my suspicion is that this is exactly what may have happened, and it's those 2 years where Mirza Hussein Ali Nuri is in those Suleimania Mountains, where he can easily cross the border from the Kurdish mountains into Iran. I mean, he could have crossed the borders, even disguised himself as the dervish that he did, and he could have gone, through Urumiyeh, where there's communities of the Yarsan, the Ahl Haq, and whatnot, and then from there, he could have easily made its way from Urumiyeh to Khoi. Or Tabriz, wherever Dayyān would have been at the time, because it just doesn't make any sense for Dayyān to have had the meltdown that he had, unless there was something else going on. There was an efficient cause for his meltdown. Go ahead.
Baha'ullah's claims, which are based on, let's see, the number of Hussein being the number that how his number refers up in one of the correspondences, the year not, his claims are based on so little.
Yeah.
That he basically needs these writings to in fact be destroyed for him to go any further.
Yes.
So it's like so convenient for it. This presents the entire opportunity he's waiting for.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, some of these Bayanis, these later Bayani chronicles, allege that many of the works of the Bāb that actually made it to Baghdad, that Baha'ullah and his wife would actually not allow some of these works to reach the hands of Subh-i-Azal, would bury them in the garden of the house that they were living in Baghdad.
We have to be preserved as best as possible, so that
this guy was determined, to basically control the narrative. This is very obvious, and so I mean, even more interesting is that once these Ottoman authorities then exile the warring factions from Aderna, one to Cyprus and the other one to Palestine and Acre, Baha'u'llah made sure that he took everything, all the writings, everything. So Subh-i-Azal basically lands in Famagusta, Cyprus, in 1869 with his sons, with nothing, virtually even his own writings.
He doesn't have a copy of the Bayan at that point?
No, nothing. They had to basically then start from scratch, to get all these writings back. In fact, there's a letter, Sayyid Miqdad Nabavi told me about this, and there's indications of it in some of these collections from Cyprus that I've seen, that Subh-i-Azal had in Baghdad had actually written a complete unity of the Arabic Bayan. Not the Persian Bayan that he then took up to the end of Unity 11, but the Arabic Bayan. The Subh-i-Azal had written a full unity per the instructions of the Bāb about finishing the 8 remaining unities of the Arabic Bayan. Subh-i-Azal in Baghdad itself, amongst the other things that he'd done, had actually composed a full unity, a full wahid of the Arabic Bayan. Now, that was taken by the Baha'is. In that letter, he says that this was taken by the Baha'is, and so it may exist today in these archives on Mount Carmel. But in this collection of material from Cyprus, there are 3 pieces of writing that I've come across that the Bayanis sent to me in 2016 that appear like 3 unities of the Arabic Bayan by Subh-i-Azal. And I actually noted this in that inventory that I did of the works of the Bāb in the Cyprus codices, codices of the works of the Bāb. And I find this extremely interesting, that Subh-i-Azal was already on to this. Now, this, for some reason, that Subh-i-Azal took to his grave, he didn't deem it important to release this to the other Bayanis, but it's there in those compilation 3 full unities of the Arabic Bayan, what appeared to be 3 full unities of the Arabic Bayan amongst these writings, in his own handwriting.
I noticed Bionic.com and PrimalPoint.com haven't been updated in a long time. Is it possible for more of the writings to
actually, I think within this year, this site will probably be updated. Yeah, I will let you know for sure when that happens. Could happen soon, could happen later.
I want to get everything on that site in paper, just in case of some sort of war or something causing a loss. All backed up on paper.
Yeah, all of this is printed out. Have been multiple copies have been made of this. Dispersed and hidden and put here and all over the place between a couple of different continents.
Here next to the what's it called? The House of Worship, Mother Temple of the West, or whatever it's called, the World Order Capital in. It's got 9 swastikas on it because it's one of the more hilarious designs. I guess it was before World War II that they designed it with the swastikas.
Yep.
But it has like a swastika, then a Star of David, and then the cross. I sometimes call it the Temple of the 9 swastikas.
Well, it is that. You know what? One of the most interesting things I observed while I lived in the United States was the totally standoffish attitude of the American Jewish community towards these Baha'is. I'm talking more about religious Jews. The Baha'is are Zionists, we know that, but the American Jewish community looked at these people like freaks. And kind of kept their distance. And occasionally you would have Baha'is going to synagogues and whatnot. And they just kept their distance. You had a few number of American Jews that were converted to the Baha'i faith, but by and large, they just the more religious Jews just kind of looked on these guys like some of us would look at, say, the Saibala people or any similar number of these crazy kind of Eastern cults. So I found that always very interesting. There was this one Orthodox Jewish guy in New York while I was living on the East Coast, and we sat on the park one day and we're talking. He's like, "Where are you coming from?" "Oh, I'm coming from California." Blah blah blah. I'd lived in New Mexico and I had been a Baha'i. I told him I've left now, and and he said, "Oh, Baha'i," and I said, "Yeah." I said, "Oh, yeah. You know what we call them?" I said, "What do you call them?" He said, "We call them the Baha'im." You know what that means? I said, "Yes, I do know what that means."
Wait, what does that mean?
The beasts from Behemoth.
Oh, perfect.
That's the plural of Behemoth. And I said, are you joking about that? Are you serious? He said, no, we're serious. We don't take these people seriously. I said, but they have a presence in Israel, and the Israeli state seems to be protecting these guys. He says, yeah, but they're just a cult, and we know that,
Yeah, but they're sort of as Baha'u'llah wanted to claim himself to be this prince. Because Iran has a history that goes, as an empire, and Cyrus being a king of kings, they want to build a world government off of this new world order.
Yeah.
So they want a one world religion to wipe out all previous revelations that don't agree with them,
including Judaism. Yeah.
One world government.
Yep. Hmm. Yeah, including
It's
Judaism.
Trying to work in America with the Native Americans for an outreach program, but they need so much deception to even start, as always. What were you saying?
Yeah, I was going to continue this thing with some of these American Jewish community members.
Yeah, they they have an agreement in Israel, right, where they don't like Baha'is have to have like almost no interaction with Israelis while they're there.
That's the policy, but there are there are interactions, obviously. You can't live on an island in the middle of Haifan, in the middle of Silicon Valley, Haifa, Israel.
What were you saying about the ones in America? I apologize.
No, that's all right. The religious Jews of the United States look at the Baha'is as freaks. That's just the bottom line. I told one of these guys about, what I had heard as a child, where the Baha'is were telling their pilgrims that one day the Universal House of Justice would take over Israel and Israel would become a Baha'i state. And this guy just jumped out of his seat. He says, "Are you serious?" I said, "Yeah, this is what I heard as a kid." Yeah,
and it goes from there to be a global mandate. It's supposed to be a global government.
Yeah.
And that, I don't know if you've ever seen the book A Thief in the Night.
Oh, yeah. William Sears, yep.
The first half of it is actually pretty interesting because it deals with recognition of the Bāb.
Yes.
But then it goes, it's really funny how the first half shows a lot of this leads to that, you can see a progression. And then basically the second half, other than he claims the title Glory of God, and there are Bible verses about Glory of God, other than that, he has nothing other than he's a claimant to support it. Oh, and then he went to high places on the earth. There's just so little that supports, in the second half of the book, it's like, and this guy said so it must have been right.
Yep, this was basically their estidlaliyat, their proofs, as they call them, to the American Baha'is. This book, Thief in the Night, I remember when we first came from Iran to the United States in the late 70s. This was the book that was making all the rounds, that they were giving to all their quote-unquote seekers at the time. And I haven't looked at this book probably in 20, 30 years now, and but I can remember faintly some of the arguments in this book is just complete BS. It's just waste of paper, waste of ink, waste of publication.
Now, true that Baha'u'llah translated best is glory or splendor?
Glory technically should be majd if you make a direct translation from Arabic. So majd is glory, specifically.
So he actually...
Baha can be glory, but it denotes more closely splendor.
I'm sorry, what's that?
So Baha, there's a denotation of glory in the word Baha, but it is more closely. The best translation of the word Baha would be from English is splendor.
Because a whole bunch. This is funny. Even the title he usurped, which most of the claims in at least The Thief in the Night are based on. See this Bible verse about glory of God?
First of all.
It's such a leap, but it doesn't even fit because that's a bad translation.
Yeah.
They can't even usurp a title right. Well, pretenders generally can't. That's
no, but this is this was I would say probably from the 1920s or even when Abdu'l-Baha came to the United States in 1911. To 1912. I would say that this whole thing's expansion was a product of very good marketing. These American corporate models of marketing were implemented in diffusing this thing because the powers that be, found a benefit in consolidating some form of organization around these people.
Now, this was right in the prior to World War I, right?
Yeah, just a few years prior to World War I. Yeah.
And Abdu'l-Baha would have been a British agent, and America at this time was backing England and promoting the lead up to war, no?
Yep.
So in so doing, they're trying to create that government in exile replacement government for their colonialist projects in the Middle East. And that this was an attempt to make it look like a good thing.
Yeah.
And because it's completely ridiculous. There was this video they put of Abdu'l-Baha's trip of America, and we talked a little bit about it earlier. But it's over the top ridiculous how it's so clear these events have to be staged that nobody would have this type of reaction. But the type of thing that people do where they have scripted events where Donald Trump calls up a person in a shirt that says "Legal Immigrants for Trump," and it gives him the mic, which he did at a speech that I went to protest Trump at. So he had this staged prop where he used that as a... It's pretty clear that Abdu'l-Baha was doing that in his trip to America.
Yeah.
Where people, the accounts of him are not credible.
No, they're not credible at all. Not credible. But I mean, incredible or not, I mean, you've got to look at the context of this, that this was a public relations campaign, okay? And it was a public relations campaign that was executed with a lot of money and a lot of support from the power structures in both Britain and also France, but especially the United States. Because this trip, he made it cross country. Nobody ever asked, well, how much did all of this cost? And when you have a very, small, local Baha'i nucleus in the United States, which incidentally at that time is in the middle of a schism with Ibrahim George Khairullah, where is this money coming from that they are spending on this dude? To travel from point A to point B between one part of the U.S. to another part of the U.S. These questions are never answered.
I know that at least they claim that there was a couple of women in Chicago that gave an enormous amount of their own personal wealth, and they're at the temple outside of Chicago.
Yeah.
There's a couple of memorials to basically people who just were gullible enough to give all their money.
Yeah, they were bankrolling this. Yeah.
They seem to have all thought that this was going to aid female liberation, which of course it absolutely did not.
No, remember at that time, this was when the suffragette movement was kind of at its peak in the United States. But this is the question: is that this guy, if they really thought that this guy was going to be the panacea for equality and the liberation of women, at least in the West, then what is this all about when this guy gets up at these churches and Theosophical Society lodges and lambasts against Native Americans and says things like, Columbus was the best thing that happened to this continent? These are the kind of blatant contradictions, and then says things like, black people ought to be grateful to white people.
Oh, yeah,
I mean, if they thought that by promoting this guy and his trip to the United States, that somehow they were headed for a humanitarian utopia in North America. I mean, this guy would have disappointed, but you don't get that impression from all the news articles and the amount of press coverage that Abdu'l-Baha got when he was in North America. None of that impression is given from that trip at all. And these are a lot of questions that I've always had. It's like like you said the last time, in that last podcast that we made, that this was all like it was just packaged like a rock concert, a tour by a band,
Yeah.
Like Queen touring during the 1970s, just something like that.
I think did I make the comparison of Beyonce's sister
yes, you
and
did. Yes, you did.
elevator fight? Because that's kind of the type of fakery that it reminds me of.
Yeah.
trying to think of. I'd have to rewatch the video, and it's garbage, and I don't want to have to get some of the specific incidences. But I was left while I was watching it, like looking at the guy who was showing it to me, like, how gullible are you to present? I was trying to figure out, are you gullible, or do you think I'm gullible? Are you a psychopath or an idiot?
But hey, man, there appear to be a lot of, I hate, excuse my French, a lot of dumbasses in the world. These early American Baha'is, unless they had ulterior motives, the big money, deep pocket socialites among, the rest of these people were just incorrigible dumbasses, because this was obviously a very well orchestrated, a tour in order to set up an organization in the United States for a very specific long-term global political end, which to some degree I could say they kind of achieved during the First World War. Number one, with the collapse of the Tsarist Empire, and before the First World War, just remember that the rivalry, the global geopolitical rivalry was between the Anglo-Saxons and the Russians, the Slavs. It was one of those accidents that basically pulled Russia into the same camp as the Americans and the Brits against the Germans and the Austrians and the Turks during the First World War. But with the collapse of the Tsarist Empire, in the Russian Revolution of 1917, that effectively meant the end of any Baha'i presence in Russian territory. So the Anglo-Saxons now had the Baha'is all to themselves. Whereas before 1917, they kind of had to share the Baha'is between the Tsarists and themselves, which, in itself tells you a lot about, the mentality of the Baha'is of the time in Abdu'l-Baha. They're basically playing to the highest bidder. But these both were imperial powers. Both of them had interests against and within Iran and Ottoman Turkey and Palestine and India, all places that the Baha'is had a presence.
I'm going to have to go over some of the things Baha'u'llah supposedly wrote to world leaders. I'm not sure how many he supposedly put out a whole bunch of proclamations to world leaders. I'm not sure how many of the world leaders actually ever got these letters. I'm not sure either. I mean, it's never been proven to me that, contrary to the claims made by the Baha'is themselves, that these letters ever got to their recipients, or whether they were even sent to their recipients. Like the letter, the tablet to Napoleon III is actually post-dated. It's sent out after Napoleon III has already been overthrown. Yet within this letter, this tablet to Napoleon III, Baha'u'llah predicts his fall, even though the fall has already occurred when the letter is sent. It's these discrepancies and problems of chronology in this stuff that raise a lot of questions about that. I think this was all theater, to tell you the honest truth. And Baha'u'llah and his partisans were very good at this. I mean, one notable example of the theater these people were up to was when they took E.G. Brown to meet Baha'u'llah. And E.G. Brown was being extremely gracious, extremely gracious. And that this says a lot about E.G. Brown as a person. But the way that he writes, and if you know that English mentality of that period, of that Victorian era, England, E.G. Brown has his tongue firmly in his cheek, and what he's describing in his first meeting with Baha'u'llah is a Hollywood production, basically, in the way that they took him to see Baha'u'llah.
I think I do recall reading that description.
Yeah, whereas with Subh-i-Azal, when he first meets Subh-i-Azal and the Azal family in Famagusta, Cyprus, it's more earthy, His account is more earthy. His description of them is more earthy. None of this pomp and ostentation and, this kind of over-bloated regality that these people wanted to project about Baha'u'llah when they took E.G. Brown to see him. It's just underscoring the utter pomposity of this guy. Which incidentally, Mirza Ghajanah Kermani very humorously described in his travel log. Go ahead.
Oh, I was saying that they refer to this as attaining the presence.
Yeah. But I've read this quote by E.G. Brown. The Baha'is have used it in so many different contexts, to try to project this image. Oh, look at this, this British Orientalist scholar who came in, and look what he had to say about Baha'u'llah. But when you actually go and read the original account, it just dawns on you that Jesus Christ, this guy had his tongue in his cheek, and he was being very gracious in the way that he was expressing this. But that this was a Hollywood production. This was or a Las Vegas production, a big show.
Who's the one guy in Syria who claimed to be the Messiah with the electrical lights?
Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
When electricity first came to Syria.
You know what? This is still very much present in the mentality and the very zeitgeist of these Baha'is. Everything is, there's an extravaganza to everything these people do, whether from their architecture to the events that they throw. The whole. It's Hollywood. It's just this incessant cycle of Hollywood. This 1992 Baha'i World Congress that they threw, which I actually went to. This is about 4 years before my formal leaving of the Baha'i faith, and about a year before I dropped out into effective inactivity from it. This was like the Oscars, but like a whole week of it. They had these choirs that had been practicing for weeks and months, and these productions that they did. It's just I look back on all of this. I mean, you can find the videos of this Baha'i World Congress from 1992 on YouTube now. And, everything is show, man. Everything is show. It's just all about production. It's all about representative perception management. And this is neoliberalism. This is capitalism. This is the spirit of the time, at least in the West. But from my point of view, this is precisely the kind of things that ails humanity. Is this, uber materialistic obsession with extravagance and opulence and crap like this,
it's a sellout, they talk about the shells in Kabbalah, like the outer accent.
This is the clip art. Yeah, absolutely. Or the egregore, if you want to get into the occultist language of the 19th and 20th century. This is humanity's modernism's egregore,
And there it flies for the peels and the shells, so to speak. And that's all that can be real to them. And one of the things I note on their events, they do have this sense of grandness, at least for the larger scale ones. The smaller scale stuff in the Oak Park situation are reasonably modest. They've bought a funeral home and are now using it as that's what they have. It's the only other one I think in the Chicago area that has a building. Most of them are still done in homes. Membership is very thin in this area, as I assume it is in most areas, where there's a lot more people on the books that actually exist.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of established this on H. Baha'i and also on Talisman, about a decade and a half ago, that was the case. Look, man, I mean, let's be honest. When you have an organization this screwed up, and with really nothing to show for it, other than claims and empty ones at that, and with all kinds of problems and a mafia, kind of administration and whatnot, people move on. People want something better for their life. They don't want to shackle themselves to BS.
And yet there's this, the diehard membership who accept this fire of ordeal that
whatever. Yeah, the leadership of fire ordeal.
Right. What it ends up being, in my opinion, we talked a little bit about the supposed persecution of Baha'is, and recently there's come out a few Yemen stories that particularly cued my interest.
Mm-hmm.
Because it often seems when America's planning on doing something stupid, we start hearing more and more stories about Baha'is and supposed victim circumstances. And I'm not sure what America's current plan is, but I just started seeing a spike in these, and not just in Iran, I guess also in Yemen now, supposedly, where some Baha'is have been arrested, and therefore it can't possibly because they were engaged in espionage. It's solely because of their religious beliefs.
Man, my views about the so-called Baha'i persecution narrative are pretty well known. I think it is a cock and bull story. But they've milked this cow, and it's worked for them. And now they have these neocons, on their bandwagon. And it's the best thing for them since sliced bread, to use these cultists as a crutch to try to undermine Iran on the propaganda level. But the fact of the matter is that Iran has problems, and these problems, a lot of them are, some of them are self-inflicted problems, but a lot of them are also problems that have accumulated and have come from the outside since pretty much 1979. And the Baha'is, rather than being a constructive force for the resolution of Iran's problems, have been instigators of a lot of these problems, whether from the outside or from within. Now, I don't blame your average rank and file, lay Baha'i who has no influence or no power or anything. I mean, I think these people are just as much victims as anybody else. But the Baha'i administration and the Baha'i financial elite, these people are criminals. And there's no question about it. Now, the problem that we have is that you have these whole segments of the Iranian middle class and pseudo-intelligentsia, a lot of them in the United States and in Canada, that because of their hatred for the Islamic Republic of Iran, are willing to jump into bed with literally the devil himself. And this is what's happened in terms of this promotion of the Baha'is by these neoconservative and right-wing think tanks and organizations in the United States.
Hawks love the New World Order stuff.
And these hawks love these New World Order stuff. I mean, if it was George Herbert Walker Bush, who even coined this phrase in the popular consciousness, in his the State of the Union address in 1991 or 2, was right after the Gulf War, the first one. I remember watching that speech live on TV at the time. So, yeah, these neoconservatives, this is what they're after. They want their New World Order, their full spectrum dominance of the planet. These Baha'is have that ideology already. It's part of their makeup, their ideological makeup. So these neocons salivate, when they interact with these people because they're on the same page, basically.
Now, the current Christian Zionism cult, doomsday cult, that's very much tied to the military-industrial complex, and that I believe I have shown evidence of huge insider trading on classified information on false flag events through John Hagee's blood code thing.
Yep.
John Hagee blessed the Jerusalem embassy and is a Trump supporter. But the idea that the next thing is going to be sold to these people when, after all, assuming the rapture doesn't happen within the lifetime of the creation of the State of Israel, which is the clock, by setting that clock for doomsday, they sort of set themselves up for what comes next, and I'm wondering if the fix is in, and we're going to try and see if we can have a Christian Zionism transformation into, well, we'll see if they would go that far. Christian Zionism obviously has a huge problem accepting anything Islamic, but Baha'is have become so Islamophobic that their Islamic roots are completely obscure to most people.
Yeah.
Like, I've actually heard Baha'is curse Imam Hussein.
Yeah, I have too.
That is so ignorant. It's like, how can anybody who's claiming support through the Bab do that? Like, that's just...
They have done this. You know, I have heard this. I have heard this stuff from so many Iranian Baha'is over the years. I heard this kind of nonsense in my own extended family. You know, like I said in the podcast with Kayvan Yahyai about the Baha'i Mafia, and also the one before, Islamophobia is a consistent narrative that is hammered again and again and again and again within the Baha'i community, and especially the Iranian Baha'i community, more than anybody else.
It's just a complete erasing of their own history because...
But this is evidence that they are colonized. That this is a colonialist enterprise. That this is about colonization, and that these ideologies are being used to colonize people from the inside. You know, and what pisses me off is that Iranian intellectuals, whether secular ones, I'm talking about mainly the last generation, and even some current, religious nationalist intellectuals, rather than looking at the Bābī movement through this lens of being a imperialist enterprise, which it absolutely was not, and this can be proven quite easily, because the Baha'is have taken, have monopolized the narrative of Bābism, has confused these people as well, these nativist Iranian intellectuals, about what Bābism was. Whereas Bābism, the religion of the Dayyān, has a lot more in common in its geopolitical views and its spiritual views and its philosophical. It has a lot more in common with people like Ali Shariati or Ali Ahmad, or a lot of these major intellectuals that became leading lights of the Islamic Revolution. But most of them who didn't actually get to see it. The mullahs have their own, they have that rivalry with all of this, beginning with the rivalry with the sheikhs, even to this moment. But when we cut through the verbiage, the Bayanis have absolutely everything in common with the greater polity and the greater community of thinkers within Iran, Muslim thinkers, Shiite thinkers, So the argument is just over details, very basic and very superficial details. Bayanis are Iranians. The Bayanis in Iran, they look at themselves as nationalists. They love Iran. And when you read the Bayan itself also expresses a trepidation about European imperialism. You have the instructions of the primal point about being cautious with Western Christian powers. Cautious in relations and trade, etc.
That was profound.
Yeah, so the Bab actually had foreseen the problems with Western imperialism a lot longer, before a lot of these mullahs themselves began to clue into it in the late 19th century.
Two competing claims.
Yeah, this is what it always boils down to. It's about the animosity is about competing authority claims. It's not about substance, really.
Well, I was saying on the Bābīs, though, they actually claimed two different things about their Bionic community in Iran. Mm-hmm. One that they're oppressed, and the other that they don't exist there aren't any ones there that don't accept, that everyone who accepts the Bab either accepts Baha'ullah, and they can't decide if there's an oppressed group of Bābīs still in Iran.
Let me give you an example. These Baha'is have claimed, and in fact this issue came up in the review of my organizational hierarchy paper, which by the first reviewer, who I found out subsequently was Peter Smith, claiming that Bionic.com is my site, and this originated with this very dubious individual calling himself Mr. Dayyān. He first introduced himself as Zoad Dawood. This guy appears to me to be some kind of a spook. But anyway, he first made the claim that the entire site of Bionic.com was my creation, that I was the website. I created the website, I maintained the website, and all the texts came from me. They never explained the contradiction of where all of these texts come from. That one person is responsible for accumulating that many texts and uploading that many texts onto this website. The claim is nonsense, categorical lie, but yet this Mr. Peter Smith put that as an element to try to discredit my organizational hierarchy paper with the editor-in-chief of this journal. It's an outright lie, and Mr. Smith should know better. But this is what he said. For the record, Bionic.com is not my site. It has a webmaster. It is maintained by the Baha'i community of Iran. It may be updated sometime this year, God knows. But this is what we're putting out there for the record. But I also want to remind these people that have made this accusation about me being the sole operator of Bionic.com, that the site Bionic.com was actually cited by Princeton University when they cataloged and uploaded the Miller-Bābī collection, the 47 volumes of the Miller-Bābī collection. I should have mentioned this to the editor-in-chief of this journal, this German Islamic Studies journal that is published by E.J. Brill. But, it's just, with these people like, especially a fundamentalist idiot like Peter Smith, who styles himself as objective academic, which he is not at all, that this is the case. But yet this is the narrative that they're pushing, and this is because to admit to the existence of a Bayani community, of the Bābīs, the Bayanis survived. To admit to this, is a real thorn in the eye of the Baha'i powers that be. They cannot allow this narrative to exist. And this also should tell you quite a lot about what kind of views these people may have about human rights. They are insistent in making their enemies non-persons. They've done this to these various schismatic groups until they got a black eye in court twice in 2007 and 8. And they've done it to all of their ideological enemies and schismatics, and first and foremost, the Bayani community. They've done this too. To deny them agency. When you deny someone agency, you basically then the next step is to deny them any rights. And this is what the Haifan Baha'i organization has done to the Bayani community of Iran. Okay, and particularly the last egregious example of this, which I consider to be a tacit form of human rights violation, was the one that was committed by Peter Smith. In the comments that he wrote to, in his review comments that he wrote for my paper. This should tell you everything that you need to know about what these people are and what their real views are and how they roll. Go ahead.
What was his comments? That was.
I'll post this I've sent these comments. I'll send it to you privately. I don't want to publicize this utter horse shit. Excuse my French. This guy wrote. But it after finding out that it was indeed Peter Smith, it confirmed a lot of views I have about this guy. What's that?
His claim includes that you run that website exclusively.
Yeah, he basically made this claim on the basis of this bogus article by this Baha'i guy, Zoad Rabu, some American guy that I have been told is actually hooked up with the U.S. military in Taiwan. And this guy kind of emerged as a spokesperson and a voice for these cultists. And he wrote this paper trying to discredit a whole bunch of the dissidents on the internet. This came out, I think, around 2011 or 12 or so. And then this Peter Smith, in his review of my article, cited this totally bogus piece by this Baha'i guy, trying to discredit not just the paper that I was trying to get published, but also the site Bionic.com, even though earlier Princeton University and the people that uploaded Miller-Bābī collection and compiled it and wrote the catalog cited Bionic.com as a source, for the information on that site.
Well, It's an excellent website. I found it to be very valuable. I found it
It's
a couple
a
years.
great website. I mean, it needs updating. A lot of a lot of the gadgetry and the colors and the setup of that site is kind of antiquated. I mean,
I assume they tried to spam it or block it or something.
Yeah, when it first went up in 2004, especially in the year 2005 after it was announced, there was a lot of attempts to hack this site, and a few times, these hack attempts were traced back to Haifa, Israel itself. Which basically tells you everything. But I want to add this. I want to add the following. Amongst the Baha'i intellectual cadre, there are two individuals that I consider to be extremely good people. Very good people. Number one is Todd Lawson. His scholarship is impeccable. And he's a straight shooter. He's a good guy. And the second person is Stephen Lambden. He's also a very good guy. He's a straight shooter. Both of them have helped me a lot in intervening years. I've gotten a lot of texts from them and articles and whatnot, especially from Stephen. Stephen Lambden has given me a few things that I hadn't, otherwise there's just no way to access. So I'm thankful to these guys, but nevertheless, it's very unfortunate that I cannot become closer friends with these people because they're part of this organization. And, they are beholden, whether they like it or not, to the agendas of the cult. And there's nothing they can do. The rest of these clowns, people like a Mujan Noman, etc. I mean, these people are like, Baghdad, who's that guy? Baghdad Ali, remember that propagandist of the Iraqi information ministry during the Second Gulf War?
Yes.
Yeah, this is the way I look at these people, especially someone like Mujahid. They're clowns, This guy has no objectivity. Even that book of his that is highly acclaimed, Introduction to Shia Islam, it is so evident, the hyper-positivistic, methodology that he's approaching the whole subject with is so evident, and the animosity is so evident, the ideological animosity. Whereas with people like Todd Lawson and Stephen Lambden, that's not there. They don't have that kind of bias, and especially Todd Lawson. I think Todd Lawson is a really good guy, as a person.
Now, Juan Cole himself has taken a step back from the Baha'i faith completely and now is just sort of not involved.
Yeah, I mean, Juan Cole shot himself in the foot, and his credibility went down the proverbial loo with his involvement with the whole Libya thing. I will never forget Juan Cole for that.
I don't recall what happened.
Juan Cole basically became a mouthpiece for the NATO attack on Libya and the toppling of the Gaddafi Jamhuriya Republic. Yeah.
I missed these statements. I'm not really that surprised because some of the statements on his blog are awfully sympathetic to some things that he should know better.
Juan Cole is basically, he's a Clintonian, basically, and he was fully on board with Hillary Clinton. What was that article that was published in Counterpunch back in 2011 that claimed that Juan Cole was a informant for the CIA, which didn't surprise me at all, that this was the case. And plus I think Juan Cole, like I said to Kay Vaughn, I think that the idol, he needs to break the idol, the demon that infests his heart. He needs to break that, and he hasn't done that. He's allowed this thing to fester and take on another form. Whereas some of the other people of that period of the 90s and early 2000s, they've managed to resolve a lot of this stuff within themselves. Because the thing is, if you are going to denounce one form of authoritarianism, it behooves you to denounce all forms of authoritarianism. That means you don't go from being a Baha'i cultist to a Democratic Party cultist and a Clintonian. and a cheerleader for imperial wars in global South countries. I mean, he was trying to cast this thing that happened in Benghazi as a revolution of the workers, when later on it turned out these were Islamists, in the employ of, obviously the CIA and NATO, who were basically armed and funded by foreign powers on top of the Gaddafi government. But he was calling this a revolution of workers in Tripoli and Benghazi. This is just, I mean, go ahead.
Paula Broadwell. Well, the one thing about Benghazi that always comes to my mind that I like to remind people of is Paula Broadwell, right before the affair with Petraeus broke.
Yeah.
She made the comments that the CIA annex in Benghazi next to the diplomatic post had prisoners, and that there had been some sort of kidnapping and interrogation or arrest of some sort of terror suspect.
Mm.
And this actually meant that and this is what brought down Petraeus for that whole, because this is what exposed that she had access to classified information she shouldn't have had.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that was so outrageous about this is it meant that Clinton, as Secretary of State, and therefore head of the diplomatic and therefore the diplomatic post, was essentially providing cover. And everyone knows, I think, the diplomatic post's, spycraft happens at these things. That's why the assassination of Khashoggi was particularly stupid. But back to Benghazi, it actually suggests that it's essentially a rescue mission or an attempt to attack people who had just committed a major crime was the motivation for that attack. And it also very much implicates... I had a sign that I did a lot of protesting with, and that was... what was it? I still may have it. Secret prisons in Africa, or it was about Hillary Clinton and secret prisons in Africa. Basically, she can't keep secret CIA prisons in Africa secret. And I forget my exact wording to fit on the sign, but it made Benghazi particularly outrageous, and everything about that overthrow was so... And this is what made the Syria situation... these people know exactly what they're doing, and it's so sociopathic.
It is sociopathic. That is exactly what it is. I was about to say that. These people are mentally ill. From my point of view, as an occultist, they're demonically possessed. Okay? And what possesses them is obviously what the Wetiko, the malevolent zeitgeist of the times, and they know exactly what they're doing, and they're doing it for career opportunities and elevation and better payout, etc. Because Cole especially was caught in a lie, not one but several. Okay, and instead of coming out after the end of this debacle, when you have a failed state in Libya, taken over by Islamists on one side who are practicing slavery now, and a NATO-propped government that is barely able to cling on. Instead of coming out and say, well, man, hey, we were wrong, and I apologize, my analysis and punditry at the time was wrong. This guy never does that. He won't come out and say that.
The Libya situation was a disaster. It made the Syria disaster even more obvious. I remember it was a big deal when I did it. I had made this sort of prediction the Christmas before the Arab Spring, and part of it was already in motion at this place, but I was very clear that everything that bordered Egypt was going to go through a revolution. I'm trying to remember what exactly the information I was basing those predictions on.
I clued into that something was about to come in that speech that Obama made in Cairo, just a few months after he became president in 2009. Yeah. And just listening to that speech closely and the words that he was saying, the trigger points, etc., it kind of dawned on me, oh God, there's something about to happen here in this region. Because even though he was in Egypt and Mubarak at the time was still president, he was, the way that he delivered that speech, he was being somewhat overtly critical of the Mubarak regime, who were his hosts at the time. And that kind of dawned on me, okay, something is afoot here, but what is it? Why are they trying to antagonize these old allies of theirs in that region? What is this all about? And about 18 months after that, or less, we saw what happened, in Tahrir Square in the beginning of the Arab Spring, well, first in Tunisia, and then with the fall of Ben Ali, and then it hit Egypt in the Tahrir Square.
There's video I'm trying to get that was really hilarious, and Anderson Cooper was in Egypt at the time, former CIA Anderson Cooper.
Yeah.
And good old Anderson Cooper, he actually showed something which was hilarious. There is this cavalry charge of people, supposedly workers from the pyramid who were dependent on the pyramid industry, and protesters. Yeah. And the thing interesting is that the animals were led off stage in something that clearly shows somebody had planned to receive the charge, and it indicates that there was a staged element to several things in the events, and I don't know, the regime change situation where we it makes me wonder what's going to happen with Saudi Arabia, where we already have military bases and stuff. I mean, obviously we had troops in Egypt beforehand as part of the Camp David Accords, and our primary concern there is the Suez Canal. The Nile is also a very important situation, and as it goes through Sudan, which Sudan, that's why I knew the Arab Spring was coming. It was the situation in Sudan that really telegraphed it for me.
I see. Yeah,
Sudan, and our involvement in the civil war there, me tracing that led me to believe that the civil war that we were trying to create was going to, that we were going to do a whole lot of more of it. And when you start looking at how many people died under Barack Obama, I actually came to the conclusion that the reason essentially the CIA, why we have a CIA transition from the son of CIA Director Herbert Walker Bush to a former CIA person, Barack Obama, is we were planning on so much bloody regime change in and around Africa and the Middle East that we needed essentially to pull a Condoleezza Rice and hide behind an African American. If you're going to kill that many people in Africa,
you might as well hide behind a smiley African American, an Uncle Tom, basically.
And
but you know why all of this is. This is all about the competition, the finance and economic and resource war that the West, and primarily led by the United States, is having with China in Africa.
Yeah, Libya had gold. The African Union was one of the sparks, and the potential economy that if Africa's natural resources back its currency, its currency is worth. The natural resources of Africa are just huge.
Yes, they are. But they're being, as we speak, they're being raped by both the West and China simultaneously.
It's like a dragon beast in a civil war, beast out of the sea and a beast on land, fighting at each other's.
Yeah, this is almost like biblical stuff straight out of the Book of Revelations. And this is why, I think it is time for conscientious people to take the side of truth rather than the side of the East or the West. And this is to his credit, at least in terms of slogans. This is something that the Ayatollah Khomeini was actually right about, that neither East nor West, na Sharq, na Gharb. And this is, I think, all people who seek a better world, and we should leave it on this note, all people who seek a better world should seek the path of the Mustadafin fil ard, the wretched of the earth. This is also the title of Frantz Fanon's book, The Wretched of the Earth. And it's also a term that shows up in the Dayyān, interestingly enough. And the duty of the various classes of a Bayani society to take care of the Mustadafin, the dispossessed, the wretched of the earth. So we have to, basically produce, follow the Fanonian path, but in the spiritualized context. And in my belief, that is the path of the Dayyān. That what the Dayyān represents is precisely this very thing. And I just wish that there were enough Muslim scholars in Iran, Shiite Muslims, that would understand that the Bayanis are actually their kindred. Rather we're not, we don't see ourselves as enemies. We disagree fundamentally with a lot of stuff the Hosa says, but nevertheless, the greater society of Iran, Shiite Iran, the people who are still earthy, the people who are still the salt of the earth people, and the Bayanis, we are one and the same. We're not different than you. We venerate the Ahl Bayt more than you can possibly imagine. We love them. They are one of us. We are central figures. We see them as their return. Whether you recognize that or not is, it's another conversation. So, this is the path that needs to be followed. And if for example, I should have mentioned this in that article that I published in 2016 with Counterpunch. There is so much of the Bayan, of the Persian Bayan, echoed in the writing of Jalal Ahmad, especially his Westoxication. And particularly the chapter where he talks about, Iran moving away from this capitalist hegemony and the kind of cooperative kind of economy that Iran would need to create in order to, own its own natural resources. And he kind of hints in the pages of that particular chapter about, kind of the collectivization of industries that would involve the four elements. And I found that always very interesting. In Jalal Ahmad, had he read the Bayan? Did he know about the Bābī? Did he know about this ordinance of the Persian Bayan about not selling and buying the four elements? Now, Allahu Alam, God knows best. But this in itself, I think, is testimony to the fact that, contrary to what some people believe, that the impact of the Bayan, without it being acknowledged, has been much deeper within Iran than most people realize. I mean, this clown here, Bahram Shubinen, in his missive to Kayvan Yahyai, was saying, "Oh, what have you Bayanis done for the world? What have you Bayanis done for Iran?" I'd like to close on this note. Well, let's see. The Bayanis spearheaded the constitutional revolution of Iran, and beyond getting into the actual documentary proof, which is so copious that it's irrefutable. One of the reasons that Sheikh Fazlullah Nuri went AWOL from the side of the constitutionists and became died in a reactionary, siding with Muhammad Ali Shah and the Russians, was because he had realized the extent of the involvement of the Azali Bābīs, the Bayanis, in the top leadership in terms of the instigating of the Iranian constitutional revolution and commandeering it. And this is the reason why this guy went AWOL from it. And he was right. That was the case. The Bayanis were at the top of this thing, and there were more Bayanis unacknowledged at the forefront of the Iranian constitutional revolution than many people realize. And to his credit, to this amazing credit that my friend said, Miqdad Navavir Azadi, of his book tarikh-i-maktum, which is this book is magisterial. He has mapped this all out. Who was who and who was involved in what. And unfortunately, I don't have the time. But if there are any people wanting to translate a book about modern Iranian history into English, this is the book to translate. Tarikh-i-maktum, Concealed History. Where Nabavi details in detail, in minute detail, with documentary evidence and some speculation, the role of Azali activists during the constitutional revolution in both the genesis and the leading of the Iranian constitutional revolution. Now, some revisionists in contemporary Iran have a negative attitude towards the Iranian constitutional revolution. I don't agree with these people. Yes, the constitutional revolution failed, and it unleashed forces that unfortunately then became the the undoing of everything the constitutional revolution fought for, namely the rise of Reza Pahlavi. Nevertheless, the ideals of the constitutional revolution didn't die, and in fact, one can argue that those 3 years of Mossadegh's premiership was a continuation of the Iranian constitutional revolution.
Exactly.
And let's remind everybody, and despite the contortions that the Baha'is are going through presently, that the Baha'is, and Abdu'l-Baha specifically, firmly and unequivocally sided with the same forces that Sheikh Fazlullah Nuri sided with, and that is with the Shah, Muhammad Ali Shah, Qajar, and obviously the colonial imperialist power of the Russians and the British in their involvement in Iran, and that is in firm evidence in his Risaleh Siyasiyeh, his treatise on political statecraft, and there is nowhere that these Baha'is can go, and whatever these lackeys of theirs amongst the neocon coteries of theirs can argue to say that the Baha'is stood with the constitutionists. They didn't. They stood with the reactionary forces. And they were not on the side of Mossadegh either during those years that Mossadegh was in power. In fact, the Baha'i elite in Iran were beneficiaries of the August 1953 coup d'etat against the Democratic Nationalist government of Mohammad Mossadegh. And with that, I think we should kind of leave it there. But I'll let you have the last word, Stephen. Go ahead.
I wanted to agree that the Baha'is were collaborators in Operation Ajax, and that becomes absolutely clear with the Shah's behavior. And it's like they silenced the light that the Azalis had brought forth with the constitutional revolution.
Right on, man. Right
on. Thank you for your time very much.
You're very welcome. Until next time. God bless.